Welcome to CV Ministries Church Security Through Prevention podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Blevins. This week is our 52nd podcast, marking our 1-year anniversary. In all honesty, I thought this was a lot to bite off when we first started. Doing a weekly podcast just seemed very overwhelming, but obviously, God knew it could be done. I was recording a future podcast with Vince Harrison, who's been on the podcast before, and he's out of New Mexico. And off microphone, he shared with me that he sends the podcast out to 105 churches in his area. To me, that's pretty remarkable, and it just goes to show the work that God is doing with the podcast. With guys like Vince out there and the hundreds that listen to it every week, it just totally is amazing to me the impact that this podcast is having. After my invitation for any of you to come on and do a recording with me for the anniversary podcast, there were 3 that took me up on it. This episode starts out with a very special guest, Todd, one of my favorite brother-in-laws. And I say that because my wife has 4 brothers. And don't think for a moment that there isn't any competition going on at any given time. And since I love them all and their sister, I have to stay unbiased. And I'm glad he took the time to call in and share his thoughts as a listener. As usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Today's the 21st of December, and it is the last day to take advantage of our Christmas sale on all of our resources in our shop. So let's jump in and hear from all 3 of our guests that have been listeners to the podcast and that wanted to share some of their thoughts about it. Welcome to the podcast. Can I get your name and where you're from?
My name's Todd Weary from Washington State. Well, I just got to say I'm your brother-in-law.
Yes.
So,
one of my favorites.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. And if anybody has heard an intro a while back, you were the one that was referenced in the intro.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I could tell by the feedback you gave on Google.
Yeah, at least I figured out how to do it.
Right. So what brings you into this anniversary podcast, Todd?
Well, I just wanted to congratulate you on your 1-year anniversary of the podcast and kind of give my 2 cents worth, I guess. I probably not worth 2 cents, but
oh no, it's much more valuable than that.
Yeah, just whatever, how it affected me listening to your podcast and just the whole church security idea.
And how has it? I mean, what have you been able to? What has impacted you that might benefit others to hear about?
When you first started with your church security at your place, and how long ago was that?
We're coming up on 13 years.
13 years. So when you were first telling me about it, I was kind of thinking, well, okay, I don't know, if it's kind of was a new idea, right? No churches have, at least that I was around, had even a thought of security, church security.
Right.
So I thought it was interesting, but I didn't know if it was necessary. You went into, and then later you were telling me about how much training you guys had done, walkie-talkies, and armed, and all that stuff. And I was thinking, wow, that's kind of seems like great, but maybe over the top,
Sure.
Then you came out with your book, The Armed Discussion in the Church. And I thought to myself, well, I thought you took the time to write it, so I'll take the time to read it. And a couple things stood out to me with that book. You talked about people that were certificate holders, right?
Right.
And I realized, well, that was me, because I had a concealed weapons permit, but I mean, really the only thing I concealed was that card in my wallet. I never carried a gun or anything outside of the house, So without more training, I realized that's probably wouldn't be a good candidate to serve on the security team. And then the second one was that you kind of convinced me that it wasn't only desirable to have a church security team, that it was pretty much necessary, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, particularly in today's day and age. Your sister, my wife, we were talking about that the other day. Just that churches just don't realize that it's not a matter of do we do it or do we not do it, because legally there's precedent of violence, and so in a civil lawsuit in particular, churches could lose their shorts on this.
right, right. Yeah. But you kind of convinced me, and this is, and I don't have any, I'm just a church goer and a volunteer. I don't have any. But then you came out with the podcast. I remember, and then I thought, well, you're taking the time to do these. So I thought I'd take the time to listen. Each one had a different aspect of the church security that was necessary. And it surprised me how many different pieces are required to have a good church, church security team. I was kind of thinking, I watched, Lori and I watched the British baking bake off or whatever. And it was kind of like, like baking a cake. There's a lot to make a really good cake, there's a lot of ingredients that go into it. And this might be a good analogy. It might not be. I don't know. You can let me know. And there's different size cakes, right? Just like there's different size churches.
Right.
But all those ingredients are still necessary, whether it's a big cake or a small cake. You still need all those ingredients, just not as much of each ingredient. And I think your podcasts have highlighted all those different things that go into making a really good church security team. If you leave one of those out, the cake tastes horrible, right? So I think you need all those different aspects of a church security team to make it good, complete.
Right. No, I think that's a great analogy, because it is, and it goes to a lot of what we talk about it being a total team concept. It's not just a few people. It's got to be children's ministry and ushers and greeters and everybody that's got to be on board to make the security of the church well. And then within the security team itself, a variety of skill levels. Not everybody's going to have the same skill levels.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of my 10,000 foot view of the podcast. Personally, there was a few more recent ones that kind of stood out to me. I feel like the armed woman.
Yeah, the well-armed woman.
Yeah, it stood out because I think they can add a lot to a security team, right? They can handle different things that would require a woman's touch.
Right.
And I really didn't think about it that much, until you aired that podcast. So that was good.
A lot of people, that a lot of people don't think about it. A lot of people think that it's primarily, guy driven, guy led, or guy, whatever, that it's just a man's thing. And it's really not. We need the balance of women on our security team to complete that cake.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that one stood out to me. The other one was the civil unrest.
Oh yeah.
Because I didn't really think about that either, but in our area, I think it's a very high possibility that could happen.
Right.
And it's something that really is not thought about. And so one just practical thing, what the guy said is, lock the doors and keep them outside, which, kind of seems simple, but I think it's a pretty good practical thing.
It is. And if people don't think about that and rehearse it, then it doesn't work well either.
Yeah. Training. I mean, that's the one thing that really stuck out to me. All the stuff that you've done is just training makes everything better.
Right. Yeah, I actually spent, an hour or so with a young man here at the house doing nothing but dry fire drills with his gun. He's never been a gun owner before and didn't know what to do. And that's what I kept stressing to him too, is this is what you can take home and this is what you can train on. And it's vital that you do that. Well, it's that way with anything that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the final one was the church safety guy, James McGarvey.
Yes.
And he was talking about a book he wrote about encouraging police officers.
Right.
And that kind of obviously struck a chord because, my son and your nephew is a police officer. In this day, man, it's tough.
It really is. And they need to be encouraged on the job they're doing.
Yeah, because they're just getting hammered and as a parent, it's tough to watch. But anyway, I thought, well, I'm gonna order that book. So I bought it and I gave it to my son, and then I'm probably gonna order half dozen more or so, and then hand them out to local police officers, I guess, and just kind of some kind of encouragement for them. They need something, seems like. Anyway, that kind of hit home a little bit, so that was good. The only other thing I was thinking, like you were asking about what people might want to hear in the future, and I don't really have. You've been doing such a great job with it, but your security team, would you say it's 13 years?
Yeah, 13 years.
It seems like you've got things down pretty good, but I'm sure along the way there was some mistakes, or you just learned things, how to do certain things. And I was thinking maybe like if you had a podcast with a top 10 list of things that worked out great, and then maybe, like a bottom 5 of things that didn't work out so great that other churches would hear and then, avoid. I think you talk about things, throughout each podcast, different things, but if they were combined into one podcast, maybe, I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. And actually I like that thought. But actually I would probably flip it. I would probably make it because not only would be the top 10 mistakes, but in that would be, okay, what did we learn from it? And how did we adjust what we were doing because of what we learned in those mistakes?
Right. I think, like, I know you mentioned a few podcasts ago that, you had a medical emergency, I think, and then a doctor said he was a doctor, but he wasn't the kind of doctor that you were actually looking for.
Right. A psychologist who lost his
that.
license. Right.
So just things like that, maybe in a more condensed podcast.
Sure. Nope. That's a great idea.
But anyway, yeah, congratulations, man. It's come along pretty good, I think, for you.
Well, thanks. And I appreciate you taking the time to, do this with me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of out of my comfort zone, behind the scenes guy. But.
Yeah, I know. But I appreciate it.
Yeah. No problem.
Welcome to the podcast. Tell me who you are and where you're from.
Well, my name's James McGarvey, and I'm with the Church Safety Guys, and I am located in Columbus, Ohio.
And this is kind of cool because James has been on the podcast. He's been to one of our seminars, so he's not just a listener. He's actually someone who is an influencer in the church security environment as well, in his own right. And so it's great to have you on today.
Well, thanks. I'm pretty excited. We are the Church Safety Guys. We do a broadcast, and we're coming up on our 50th anniversary broadcast. And so when you sent the email out about your podcast and celebrating that, it was kind of funny to me because it seems like you've been out there longer in the podcast world than just the 50 episodes. But But it was different, I am kind of different, and it was cool because I started thinking about it, and I've had the chance, obviously, to meet you in person, and you came out to Dayton, Ohio, to do a class for a church, several churches, and so I went to that class and spent the weekend with you there. And one of the things, and again, I don't want to take too much of your time with this, but one of the things that I really just appreciated about you and your ministry, and I just wanted to share that with you, and for anybody that's listening, if they're looking for training in church safety and security, one of the things that I loved about it is we always try and partner and do stuff with folks that have a heart for ministry, and folks that realize that it's not just about tactical stuff, it's not just about medical, but it's about bringing everything together, and remembering that we're serving God, and we have to put him first, and we have to be focused on the spiritual aspect of it. And so someone can say that, but until you actually have the opportunity to go talk to them and see how they do things, there's always that question mark. And for those listening, I've had the honor and privilege of going in and seeing Dan and his team. And, the thing that probably most comes to my mind was the scripture verse in 1 Peter 5:2, which says, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you're willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, what verse today, when I talked to you, Dan, what verse kind of resonates? And that really kind of popped into my head. And I think part of the reason was I got to see it in action. I saw the love and the care and the humility of you and your team helping others. There was never a moment where I sensed you were frustrated or anyone else was frustrated with weird questions, or maybe somebody doing something crazy in the training, or, just weird things that happen at church safety conferences and training. Because, I've been there too, but it was really demonstrated. And so for those of you that maybe are listening or are thinking about, maybe we should have CV Ministries come in or do that in the future, please take advantage of Dan and his team and the experience. And it's just probably one of the most well-rounded training opportunities that is available out there. So I just want to say that, and certainly, just compliment you guys, because I do feel like that. It's a lot of times we'll say, and we can focus on saying, well, it's a ministry, we need to support the church and we need to do this and that. But hearing you say that and then coming and seeing you guys in action, it just really, really multiplied that impact to me, that, you were patient, you were kind, you were offering information that needed to be offered, and you guys just did a phenomenal job. So
I really appreciate it. Yeah, we love doing it, and the team and I, when we get done, we talk about it afterwards. Like, that was great.
Sure.
we just feel that God, this is where God has us, and we haven't felt released from it, and we just love doing it, and love getting out and meeting the different churches and sharing that with them.
Well,
I appreciate that.
It's definitely evident, and one of the things that, that I've always looked at, even with training for my churches, or my church rather, it's kind of funny. I say my churches because I'm actually in the middle of helping another church plant get going, which is a whole new experience for me. But
That's awesome.
Yeah, our church, actually, one of our pastors of the church that I've been to is going to start a sister church. And so he's kind of come to me, and he's like, I know, you know, what was it, 13? He's like, at 13 years ago, you started the safety team and security team here. And I was wondering if you would be interested in doing it all over again. And so I'm like, you know what? I have never, as long as I've been involved in ministry, um, I've never been part of a church plant. So I kind of felt like God was telling me to get involved and do that. And so it's learning experience, um, but yeah, you always, whenever you look for training, one of the things that I always look at is, building a relationship with the trainer, with the training organization, and that sort of thing. And um, over the years, I have declined having certain people come in, certain trainers and that sort of thing, just because I felt that they weren't ministry really minded. It was more of like a security type thing. And, you guys, when you came out, you weren't, nobody was too busy to stop and answer a simple question. No one was made to, be felt belittled or anything like that. Just, it was very encouraging. And you could definitely tell that, that you guys really had a heart for doing it. And I think when you do, when you're serving and you're doing what God wants you to do, and that that's what God wants you to do, and God's put you there, it's a rewarding thing. And I think people are blessed and people see that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
So I'm just excited to get to be part of your your celebration of podcasts, and glad that we've had a chance to cross paths and get to know each other better. So
absolutely. Yeah. It's hard for me to believe that, we're hitting the 52nd podcast, like 1 year. I never thought I'd ever be doing this. I know, you and I've talked about this before. Never thought that this would ever be on my radar of doing a podcast. That's for sure. Or training in general.
Yeah. Yep.
When offline, we were just talking about, what you do when you're not doing this. And it's a significant job that has a significant impact in our world. And God's called you to that as well as this. So that's got to keep you pretty busy. So I appreciate what you guys are doing too.
Well, thanks. Yeah. All of us with our ministry, and that we've started, which is the church safety guys, that in itself, I mean, we've had just an amazing year. And the three of us actually that are part of that ministry, we work full time. And so there's always a balance of trying to spend the correct time, with our families at home, and balance church responsibilities and serving, at our own church. So sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge, but, when I look back, and it's funny because, you mentioned to me earlier offline, that someone mentioned to you one of the devotionals that we put together, that it really had an impact. And we've put together four devotionals this year, and I know a lot of that comes from the fact that we had COVID, and the fact that our churches were not, we were shut down. We weren't doing as much on the road, and so we had the opportunity to sit down and say, what can we do to contribute and do things off the road. And so, if you had asked me a year ago, okay, or if you had said a year ago, I think you're going to have, 4 devotionals, and we're getting ready to release next year, probably the beginning of next year, an actual book, not a devotional, but it's actually a biblical case for church safety and church security. and it's written specifically for pastors and lay folks that are trying to get into that ministry, and offers a solid theological explanation as to why it's so critical today to have this ministry in the church. But again, if I look back at the last year and the folks that God's blessed me with the opportunity to meet, to get to know, even the relationships that we've strengthened with the other guys. We have Paul Buckner and Mike Scully, and Mike earlier this year was laid off because of COVID. He worked for Dell and was let go with a bunch of other people. And it was, we've all been there. We've all been in that situation where, you don't know what to do. You were laid off and you're trying to support your family and stuff. And we were able to reach out to him and his family and, pray with him and minister to them and just say, look, you know what, we're across the country, but we got your back, and, we're going to help you and do what we can. And so having that relationship, even developing that relationship over a distance in the last year, it just, I don't know, it's a pretty amazing thing, but God can do a lot in a short amount of time. So,
yeah, and it's the family of God is really what it is. And it's, we saw it, in 21 years in the Air Force and moving around the country every 2 or 3 years.
Sure.
We've got friends all over the country that when we do meet up with them, when they come and stay at our house and visit or whatever the case is, it's as if time never left.
Yeah.
We're all part of the same family. Yeah. So that's awesome that you guys are able to do that with him. Well, I thank you for taking a few minutes of your time today to come on and share in our celebration.
I appreciate you reaching out and asking.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Welcome to the podcast. What's your name and where are you from?
Jeff Rush. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama.
How you doing, Jeff?
I am well. Life is good. Can't complain. Wouldn't do any good anyway.
So people don't know this, but you and I serve on if they don't know it, some may, but that you and I serve together on the FBSN, the Faith-Based Security Network's Board of Directors.
Correct.
Yeah. And it's been a real pleasure getting to know you over this time.
The pleasure has been mine. I have learned so much from you in particular, as well as the others. It's been an interesting ride.
Yeah, and we did a podcast together a while back, and that was a lot of fun too.
It was.
So what is it that you'd like to share today?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, it has been my experience with the podcasts that usually when it hits my email, it is almost always the A1 or the one, I don't know what the proper English would be, that I needed to hear, either because of something going on in one of my classes or a problem at our church or whatever. It just seemed like the timing, the timing, at least for me, was incredibly just spot on. The people you were interviewing, their tips, their concerns, their comments just seemed to hit me at the right time, in the right place. And I think that's a God thing without question. And I suspect that the same has happened to others, probably different podcasts than perhaps the ones that I'm familiar with. But I think that's interesting and unique, and certainly has helped me down the road.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I agree with you. It's totally a God thing, how God does that in our lives in different ways, whether it's different scriptures that come our way or a song or something like this for you, the podcast. That's pretty awesome to see how God has used this.
Oh, absolutely. No question. And I think the second thing, and we've had this conversation in some of the sheepdog coffees, and I suspect we'll have this conversation as a board coming up. But I think the other thing I would say is to our brothers and sisters out there is just to hang in. I mean, I know that's kind of a trite saying now, especially with the corona and all of that, but we can't give up the fight. I've been reading a couple of articles just today from Crisis Magazine, which is a Catholic magazine. The authors, at least the ones that pique my interest, seem to be all evangelical Catholics, if that's a terminology that can be used. Certainly they're conservative. And they're not necessarily involved. In fact, I don't think any of them are involved in church security at all. But they do speak to the battle that we're in, and as a culture, as a society. And that battle is with the enemy. And what he is looking for is for us to give up. And I know it's tough. Trust me, I have my own issues with some things at our church, as I'm sure every security operator does. But we can't give up. We have to hang in. We have to find ways to do that. I think your podcast, and I'm not just saying this, I think your podcast is a great way to do that, if for no other reason, because you get to hear what other people are doing and get some ideas. But more importantly, we've got to hang in together, and we need to know that there are people out there that we can talk to. There are people out there that can give us some guidance. There are people out there that can support us in this battle. Because if we all give in, again, another trite saying, but if we all give in, the enemy wins, and we've got nothing to fight for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. This is, I think, far more a spiritual battle than people really realize. That Satan is really under attack. All right, he's really attacking and taking this opportunity to do that.
Oh, no question about it. You see it. You see it in well, certainly you saw it, I guess, throughout the election. You see it in some of the orders that have existed in terms of what's opening and what's not opening. I chuckled. There's a pastor in California that rebranded. Now, I don't know how this worked, but he rebranded his church a strip club so that they could be open. And at the beginning of the service, he strips off his tie. And I mean, it's a shame. I chuckle at that. And it's a shame we've gotten to that point. It's a shame that he thought, and presumably he had support from elders or the board or whatever they have, that they had to do that in order to reach out to their parishioners. And it's that kind of thinking that I think will win out in the long run. Again, another trite saying that I don't particularly like, but we have to think out of the box in this time. And if we want to win the battle, and I think we will win the battle, we read ahead to the end of the story. We know how it works out.
Amen.
But it requires us to stay in the fight. And that's what I think is the sort of the second thing I'd like to get out to your audience is we just got to stay in the fight. You're not alone. You are not alone. And that is such an important message. Not only are you not alone because God is with us without question, but you're not alone because there are others going through the same thing. There are others dealing with some of the same issues. And we've got to hang tight and hang together. What is it Ben Franklin said? If we don't hang together, we will hang individually. Or it may have been Horatio Kane in CSI Miami. But one of those important people said something like that. And I think to some extent there's truth in that. Just hang together, reach out to people. There are people who are with you all the way, and your podcast helps bring those people to your attention in ways that you might not otherwise have known.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, something what you just said, we say it very similarly in our seminar is, we've read the back of the book, we know we win. We just have to, our role is to get as many people from now until then as safely as possible.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct.
Yeah, and we can't lose focus of that.
And we're fighting on myriad fronts. And we have a role. I would argue, and I think you would agree that as security operators, certainly church security operators, we have a role in pretty much all of the fronts. In some of the fronts, I think we're out front. In some of the fronts, we're in the back. But I think as the enemy hits us from all sides, we have a role as security operators to be involved in all of those sides. It's just a question of what our role is given the particular area in which we're being hit.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Great word, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir, very much. Enjoy it. Keep it up. And Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And look forward to 2021.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, brother. Hang in.
Thanks. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. If you really enjoyed it and you found it of benefit to you, we really appreciate your feedback. There's several different ways that you can provide us feedback. One of them is to subscribe to the podcast, is to share it with others, and another is to contact us directly, particularly if you have any questions or concerns or you want more information on how to host a seminar in your community. You can contact me directly at danielblevins@cv@heart.com, or you can go to our website. That's cv-ministries.com. Both of those will get you in the right direction. Until next time, make sure that you're out there protecting the flock with a heart of service.